The crowd fell silent as jets screamed overhead, carving a blazing American flag across the sky, an unexpected tribute to a canceled Veterans Day float. Jake's defiance had drawn the impossible, but beneath the roar, tensions simmered, and unseen forces moved in shadows. What happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Jake Thompson stood alone in his garage workshop late one evening, the low hum of the fluorescent light overhead buzzing against the thick silence. Every surface was covered with pieces of the float, photographs of comrades frozen in time, carefully handwritten letters, dog tags that rattled faintly when touched. His hands trembled slightly as he traced the faded image of Mike, his best friend, smiling wide-eyed on a dusty battlefield. Years of shared hardship, laughter, and loss seemed to cling to that photo like a second skin. For Jake, this float wasn't just a decoration. It was a living memorial, a sacred promise he'd made to his fallen brother. The weeks leading up to the parade had been a relentless grind. He'd risen before dawn to scour thrift shops for authentic memorabilia, stayed up into the early hours painting banners that would flutter proudly in the autumn wind, and pored over every detail to ensure the tribute was flawless. This was his way of reclaiming some measure of peace from the chaos of war, honoring the sacrifices that no parade could truly capture, but that demanded recognition nonetheless. The float was his voice when words failed, the last chapter of a story too painful to tell out loud. But the phone call from the mayor's office shattered that quiet world. Mayor Cynthia Graves, a woman relatively new to Maplewood politics, but fiercely determined to stamp her authority on the town, summoned Jake to a private council meeting. The invitation felt more like an indictment. At that meeting, surrounded by stern faces and murmurs of disagreement, Jake learned that his float had been canceled, deemed too political, divisive, and a threat to the parade's neutral spirit. The words struck him like bullets, each phrase an unexpected betrayal. To Jake, the idea that honoring fallen soldiers could be controversial was incomprehensible. This wasn't a partisan issue or a platform for debate. It was about people who had laid down their lives for the freedoms everyone enjoyed. The town's decision didn't just silence a float, it silenced memories, erased stories, and dismissed the raw grief of veterans like him. It felt like a deep wound, opened anew by the very community he had served for decades. Returning home that night, Jake sat on the worn leather couch in his modest living room, the weight of disappointment pressing hard against his chest. He stared out the window at the quiet streets of Maplewood, the houses dim and still, as if the town itself was holding its breath. How could the place he called home betray its veterans? He thought of Mike, who had never returned from a faraway desert, who had no voice to defend the honor that Jake now felt was being stolen away. Among the veterans who learned of the cancellation, whispers of outrage spread like wildfire. The local VFW hall buzzed with heated discussions, a mixture of disbelief and simmering anger. For them, the float symbolized more than just a parade entry. It was a collective memory, a shared pain, and a desperate hope that their sacrifices weren't forgotten. The move to cancel it felt like a slap in the face, a fracture in the fragile bond between those who served and the civilians who cheered them once a year. Jake's motivation was painfully clear. This wasn't about politics or optics. It was about dignity and respect for the fallen and the living. He couldn't let this injustice stand, not without a fight. Somewhere beneath the bruised pride and stunned disbelief, a fire began to flicker, a fierce determination to reclaim what had been taken, not just for himself, but for all who had given everything. This was more than a float. It was a legacy, a vow etched into his soul, refusing to be erased. In that quiet house on Maplewood's Main Street, amid the muted shadows of a disappointed man, the first sparks of resistance were quietly igniting, the beginning of a battle that no bureaucratic decision could extinguish. The cancellation of Jake's float didn't fade quietly into the background. It exploded. Overnight, Maplewood's usually tranquil social media channels transformed into battlegrounds. fraught with impassioned debates and bitter accusations. Jake found himself thrust unwillingly into the eye of a storm, where every post, every comment twisted his motives like a knife. Some called him stubborn, others accused him of dragging war back into a town trying to heal. Whispers of political agenda circled like vultures, darkening the very cause Jake had hoped would unite them. But beneath the clamor lay a deeper, sharper pain. Each word of doubt tore at the fabric of his identity, had his decades of sacrifice, his years spent in distant, brutal places, amounted to nothing more than a footnote, a bothersome reminder. Inside the walls of his home, the quiet aftermath of the storm was suffocating. Jake sat in his favorite armchair, the weight of rejection pressing against his chest like a leaden shroud. His mind replayed every memory, the faces of comrades lost, the silent promises made beneath foreign skies. Was this how it ended? With his hometown turning away, dismissing the echoes of battles fought in shadows? The ache was relentless, a cold isolation that crept into his bones, threatening to extinguish the fragile flame of hope. Emily, ever the steady anchor, never left his side. She spoke in gentle but resolute tones, refusing to let despair claim him. "They may try to silence you," she said, voice firm but kind, "but the truth can't be buried. There are veterans who need your voice, who need this tribute. Don't let them win by walking away." Her conviction was a lifeline, pulling Jake from the depths of his doubt and reminding him that surrender was not an option. In her eyes, he saw reflected a courage that bolstered his own, an unyielding belief that justice still mattered. Emboldened, a surge of grassroots support began to swell around the issue. Ordinary citizens, veterans, and civilians alike signed a petition demanding the float be reinstated, their names swelling like a rising tide of discontent. The quiet halls of the town's library and coffee shops echoed with conversations that once felt forbidden, conversations about honor, memory, and the cost of silence. The petition, simple but potent, became a rallying cry, a tangible symbol of resistance against erasure. Jake seized this momentum, channeling his pain into purpose. Organizing a peaceful rally outside City Hall, he mobilized a crowd that quickly grew beyond Maplewood's borders. Veterans from neighboring towns, local families, and young activists arrived, their faces etched with determination and shared grief. The air was thick with the tension of history colliding with politics, a collective heartbeat pulsing beneath the raised banners and solemn speeches. Yet, amidst the swelling chorus of voices demanding recognition, Mayor Cynthia Graves remained unmoved. Behind closed doors, she weighed the political risks, fearing that bending to Jake's cause would fracture the fragile alliances she had cultivated. To her, the parade was a stage carefully curated to project unity, not a platform for contested memories. But Jake's fight had become far greater than a single float. It was a struggle to reclaim dignity, to force a reckoning with truth in a town divided by fear and politics. The tension carved deep fissures through Maplewood's community, exposing raw nerves and fragile loyalties. Yet with every step forward, the movement grew stronger, impossible to ignore. Then, just as the battle seemed destined to grind on in stalemate, an unexpected figure emerged from the shadows of the conflict. Captain Alex Reynolds, the commanding officer of the Blue Angels Flight Demonstration Squadron. A decorated pilot with a reputation for fierce integrity and unyielding loyalty, Reynolds's support sent shockwaves through the town's discourse. His endorsement was more than symbolic. It was a powerful validation from a living emblem of service and sacrifice. With Reynolds joining the cause, the battle for Jake's float suddenly held the promise of tipping the scales, turning quiet resistance into a tide that Maplewood could no longer refuse to face. The morning air hung thick with anticipation, a brittle tension simmering beneath the crisp autumn light. Jake stood among a tight-knit cluster of veterans and supporters, their faces drawn but resolute, eyes lifted toward the wide expanse of the sky above Maplewood's Main Street. The murmur of the gathering, a mix of whispered prayers, murmured names, and quiet solidarity, was suddenly shattered by a powerful roar, low and thunderous, cutting through the calm. Heads snapped upward as the unmistakable silhouettes of military jets streaked across the blue, a symphony of precision and power that stole the breath from the crowd's lungs. The Blue Angels, led by Captain Alex Reynolds himself, were here. Their formation was flawless, a choreography of steel and fire tracing arcs and loops with a gravity-defying grace that seemed to defy the very limits of human will and machine. The jets screamed overhead, each pulse of afterburners a heartbeat pounding against the sky, pulling the eyes and spirits of those below into the heavens. The climax came as the squadron executed a majestic, sweeping maneuver that painted the stars and stripes across the firmament, the red, white, and blue of the American flag drawn in vapor trails so vivid it seemed the very sky had become a canvas for honor and remembrance. Tears glistened on cheeks weathered by years of service and sacrifice. Some veterans gripped the shoulders of comrades, their fingers trembling. Mothers clutched children close, whispering explanations of valor and loss as the jets thundered on, a soaring tribute that transcended words. The air was electric, a charge of collective memory and unspoken grief transformed into soaring triumph. After the jets thundered beyond sight, the crowd stood in reverent silence, the echo of engines lingering like a sacred hymn. Then Captain Reynolds emerged, stepping forward amid the sea of faces, his presence commanding yet humble. His voice cut through the quiet, with a tone forged in the same steel resolve that shaped the squadron he led. "We heard about Jake's fight, about the float and the town's decision. This wasn't just about one man or one event," Reynolds said, eyes scanning the crowd. "It's about all of us who wear this uniform, who have carried the weight of freedom on our shoulders. When the message of honor is silenced, we have to find new ways to speak it loud and clear." He spoke not just to those present, but to every soul in Maplewood, cutting through the divisiveness with a clarity that was both challenge and balm. The Blue Angel's flight was not a defiance. It was a unifying symbol soaring above politics and pain, lifting the narrative beyond narrow debates into the realm of shared dignity. From the sidelines, Mayor Cynthia Graves watched, her posture rigid, lips pressed in a thin line. The weight of the moment settled heavily on her shoulders, the undeniable power of respect and reconciliation breaking through the political calculus she had clung to. For the first time, she saw the rally not as a threat, but as a reflection of something deeper, a community grappling with its soul. Jake felt a profound shift within himself. The raw ache of rejection that had gnawed at his core was replaced by a swelling pride that surged like a tide. His message, honor, remembrance, and respect, had pierced the fog of discord, carried not just by voices on the ground, but by the very sky itself. The flyover was more than spectacle. It was a statement, a soaring anthem that no council vote or political maneuver could mute. In that moment, under the vast painted sky, Jake understood the true meaning of his fight. Some honors are etched not only in monuments or floats, but in the hearts of those who remember and the skies that bear witness. The flyover became an indelible testament, a living, breathing symbol that true honor, once given, could never be canceled, only lifted higher.